She didn't see the sniper. She felt him. It was the sort of awareness that doesn't arrive as a thought, but as a pressure, like a hand against the back of her neck. One moment she was moving through the ridge as planned, staying low, checking her angles, listening to her own breath in the headset. The next, something in the air changed. It was small at first, almost nothing, but her body caught it before her mind could name it. A quiet that felt wrong. A pause in the wind that didn't match the terrain. The kind of silence you don't notice until it tightens around your ribs. She slowed her steps without meaning to, boots settling into the dirt with more care than before. She learned to trust those signals early in her training, long before this mission. Instructors used to tell her that intuition wasn't magic. It was pattern recognition firing faster than logic. You spend enough hours watching how danger begins, and your senses learn the shape of it. That's what this felt like. A shape she couldn't quite see but couldn't ignore. She took in the tree line again, sweeping her eyes across the branches, the shadows, the pockets where a rifle barrel could disappear. Nothing moved. That only made her more certain she wasn't imagining it. She shifted her weight and let her hand rest near her weapon, not drawing attention to the motion, just settling into a readiness that felt natural. Her breathing changed too, leveling out, slower. She spotted a thin slice of terrain where the hill dipped just enough for someone to hide. She made a note of it in her head, the same way she would note a trap, a cable, a glint of metal. She didn't speak. Speaking would break the fragile thread of awareness she was holding. Instead, she listened harder. Sometimes danger announces itself with noise. A snapped branch, a dislodged stone. This one didn't. The world simply felt too still. Even her team seemed to sense the shift, though they hadn't said anything yet. She caught the faint rustle of one of them adjusting his stance, the soft scrape of a boot, as another slowed his pace to match hers. These weren't errors. These were reactions. Their bodies understood the moment too. She scanned again, slower this time. She paid attention to the places that looked too perfect, too undisturbed. A hiding spot often looks cleaner than the ground around it because someone tried not to leave a trace. She noticed a patch of brush that sat a little flatter than the rest. She didn't know if it meant anything, but her mind locked onto it the way a compass locks north. The sun was low enough to create long shadows, the kind that give a hidden shooter exactly what they need. She angled her head slightly, as if listening to the ground itself. She didn't hear the sniper's breath or the slide of his clothing or the shift of his weight. She heard the absence of all of that. A vacuum of sound. A held breath somewhere out there that wasn't hers. Her pulse stayed steady. That surprised her. She thought she'd feel a spike of fear, a jolt of adrenaline. Instead, she slipped into the kind of focus she'd only reached a few times in her life. Everything drew inward. Her field of attention narrowed without shutting out the wider picture. She saw details she hadn't noticed on her first pass. A leaf turned at an odd angle. The way the grass near that patch of brush bent slightly inward, the unnatural straightness of a line in the dirt that could have been made by a rifle bipod being set down. All of it built a case in her mind long before she made a conscious choice. She adjusted her position just a little, giving herself a lower profile. Not enough to draw attention, just enough to change the math if someone was sizing up a shot. She kept her head still, her eyes forward, but her focus reached deeper into the landscape. She pictured where she would set up if she were the sniper. She pictured the angle he'd need. She pictured how long he'd been watching. She didn't know yet that the rifle was already pointed at her skull. She didn't know how close the moment had come, but she felt the weight of another person's intent, sharp and cold and focused. It wasn't fear that moved through her then. It was recognition, a quiet acceptance that someone out there had made a decision, and she needed to make one of her own just as fast. SEAL training rewires how you react long before you ever face a real threat. It strips away the part of you that hesitates and replaces it with something cleaner and faster. She remembered the earliest days of it, when instructors pushed them past the point where thinking helped. They ran them until their legs shook, soaked them in cold surf until their teeth rattled, and then asked them to make decisions under pressure that would matter later. At the time, it felt like punishment. Only afterward did she understand it was practice for moments like this, when the world shifts without warning and you have no time to debate what to do. Training taught her to read movement with a kind of second sight. Not supernatural, just repetition burned deep into muscle. When someone raised a weapon in a drill, even slightly, she learned to catch the angle with her peripheral vision and respond before her mind formed the words. When an instructor changed the tone of his voice, she learned to hear the meaning behind it. These pieces of awareness stacked up over months until her reactions were no longer reactions. They were instincts shaped by thousands of small corrections, each one sharpening her timing. She remembered a night exercise where they ran them through a mock village with blank rounds and role players. The point was to force speed without recklessness. She was clearing a room when a target appeared at the threshold. She didn't think. Her body moved as if pulled by a string, turning, firing, shifting her stance, all before she caught her own breath. The instructor called out the time. It was fast enough to pass. Not the fastest in the class, but clean. She replayed that moment for weeks afterward. Not because she was proud of it, but because it showed her that training wasn't just something she did. It was something she became. In real missions, that same instinct took over before fear could get in the way. Fear tries to slow you down. Training speeds you back up. When her pulse kicked up, her breathing automatically steadied. When her vision narrowed under stress, her mind broadened her awareness. When her muscles tensed, she loosened them in the places that mattered. None of this was conscious. It happened the way a hand moves away from a flame. Quick, direct, certain. Her teammates were shaped the same way, which meant they operated on a shared rhythm. One person sensed danger and the whole team shifted. A small tilt of the head or change in pacing was enough to pass the message. During drills, instructors drilled this idea into them. Speed comes from trust, and trust comes from consistency. You learn to trust the person next to you because you've watched them make the same choices under the same strain over and over. When a threat appears, nobody waits for a full sentence. You rely on the common language you built through repetition, and it moves you as one unit. She remembered a specific drill in Hell Week where they had seconds to react to a simulated threat. The instructors fired blanks behind them without warning. Most people would jump or stumble. They had been trained to pivot, drop, and identify the source before adrenaline could fog their thinking. She felt the heat of the moment and the burst of sound, but her body followed a familiar pattern. Down, locate, act. Her classmates moved just as quickly, some faster. It didn't matter who was first. What mattered was that they reacted together. Over time, she learned that the speed everyone saw in SEALs wasn't about quick reflexes alone. It came from removing unnecessary steps. You don't wonder if a sound means danger. You decide it does until you know otherwise. You don't overthink angles or positions. You absorb them the second they enter your field of vision. You don't freeze when something unexpected happens. You fall back on the hours of work that trained your mind to stay ahead of the moment. That was why, on missions, she often moved before her conscious mind caught up. A shadow crossed too quickly, and she shifted her stance. A glint of metal appeared at the edge of her sight, and her weapon aligned with it. Someone on her team inhaled sharply, and she felt the cue to adjust. These weren't guesses. They were the result of a body trained to survive by staying half a beat ahead. So when danger brushed against her senses that day, she didn't need to identify it first. She didn't need to weigh options or list outcomes. Her training filled the space where fear might have lived and guided her with something simpler than thought. A flash of awareness, a tightening of focus, a readiness that arrived faster than the threat itself. They didn't speak when something felt wrong. They didn't need to. Their communication had been shaped by months of drills that forced them to read one another without language. In training, instructors often took their radios away, drowned out their voices with surf, or put them in situations where sound would give them away. You learned to watch shoulders, not mouths. You learned to notice how someone shifted their weight or how their breathing changed. By the time they were working as a team, these signals felt as clear as spoken words. That day, when the air tightened and she sensed the sniper, the others recognized the same shift even though she hadn't said anything yet. The man to her left slowed half a step. It seemed insignificant, but that pause meant he sensed something too. Another teammate rotated his wrist just slightly, settling his grip on his weapon. No one would have noticed it unless they'd spent hundreds of hours together. For her, it was as obvious as a raised hand. When one person's guard rose, the rest rose with it. Silent communication made them feel like a single organism more than a group of individuals. They reacted to subtle cues the way nerves carry signals through a body. If one part sensed harm, the whole thing focused on the source. She remembered how instructors drilled this into them. They'd run through a clearing exercise where recruits had to move through a mock village without saying a word. If anyone spoke, the instructors blasted them with hoses or forced them into push-ups until their arms gave out. It wasn't cruelty. It was a lesson. In real danger, sound can be a liability. Silence becomes your strongest form of coordination. She remembered one drill where they had to navigate a maze in total darkness. They weren't allowed to talk, and they had to carry heavy gear. Someone at the front changed direction, and everyone behind him felt it through the tension of the line. It taught her to sense movement without relying on sight or sound. Later, in real missions, she used that same sensitivity to read the slightest shift in her team's posture. The unspoken cues became habit. A tightened jaw meant someone spotted a movement. A lowered chin meant stay sharp. A subtle step outward meant widening the field of coverage. Even the way someone scanned the terrain communicated something. A faster sweep meant concern. A slower, deeper scan meant suspicion. She paid attention to all of it, and so did they. On the ridge that day, their silence wasn't emptiness. It was information. She felt the awareness spread through the group like electricity. Her point man tilted his head a fraction to the right. That told her which direction he thought the threat was coming from. She didn't need him to point. She read the angle of his neck, the way his shoulders settled, the direction of his eyes, even though he didn't turn them all the way. Behind her, another teammate adjusted his stance. She heard the faintest crunch of dirt under his foot and knew he had shifted his center of gravity to prepare for movement. Their formation changed without a command. They tightened just slightly, enough to reduce exposure, but not enough to look obvious. It was the sort of adjustment that only a trained eye would notice. They all knew the importance of not signaling to a hidden shooter that they were aware. Still, their movements aligned as though they had agreed on a plan. They always had at least 3 plans ready in their heads, and they rotated through them automatically, depending on the terrain and the threat. The calmness in their movements mattered too. They had been trained to stay measured even when alert. Any sudden motion could trigger a shot, so the team kept their gestures smooth, controlled, and almost casual. She felt the rhythm in them. A silent count, a shared breath. They weren't panicking. They were tuning into one another. She could sense their trust as well. Each one relied on the others to watch the angles they couldn't see. When she shifted her gaze toward the distant brush, she knew someone else had already adjusted to cover her blind spot. When she crouched a little deeper into the terrain, she felt the team reshape around her. They weren't reacting to her alone. They were responding to the situation they all felt building around them. Their communication wasn't about signaling danger. It was about preparing for what came next. A sniper thrives on surprise. A SEAL team reduces that advantage by acting in sync, anticipating one another's moves, and filling every gap before the enemy can exploit it. That silent coordination was their armor. It kept them from scattering their attention. It kept them moving with purpose. And in moments like this, when one wrong motion could trigger a shot, their wordless understanding made the difference between chaos and control. The shot came a heartbeat after she confirmed what her instincts had been trying to tell her. It wasn't loud at first. It was sharp in a way that cut through everything else, a sound that didn't belong to the landscape. She didn't see the muzzle flash, but she felt the intent behind it. The sniper had committed. The trigger had been pulled. In the instant between the sound and her reaction, her training closed the gap. She dropped lower, shifting her weight into the smallest slice of cover she could reach. She didn't think about whether it was enough. She only moved. Her team reacted even faster. The moment the shot cracked through the ridge, their formation snapped into the shape it always took when contact started. No one shouted orders. No one asked where the shooter was. They moved as if the plan had already been spoken. One teammate took the flank angle without hesitation. Another aligned his weapon toward the most likely shooting lane. The third scanned upward, tracing the trajectory almost instinctively. Their collective reaction was quicker than the sniper's follow-up. What gave them the edge wasn't raw speed. It was precision. Each person knew exactly what part of the field they were responsible for. No wasted motion. No confusion. She kept her body pressed against the earth, listening for anything that would give the shooter away. A rifle report can echo, especially in uneven terrain, but SEALs learn to hear past the echo. They pay attention to the way sound bounces, the direction dust shifts, the beat of silence that comes after a shot. She listened for those cues, letting her pulse settle just enough for her ears to work again. She felt rather than saw her point man take the initiative. He adjusted his angle by only a few degrees. Anyone else might have missed it, but she knew exactly what it meant. He had a bead on the shooter's likely position. He wasn't guessing. He was calculating based on terrain height, probable distance, the sound's direction, and the way the sniper had waited for the right moment to fire. A patient shooter gives clues without meaning to. She kept her head down, eyes forward, trusting her team to do what they had been trained to do. Another teammate signaled a location with a small twitch of his wrist, almost hidden, but clearly understood by everyone who had gone through the same grueling rehearsals. That slight motion told them the sniper was dug in somewhere along a narrow stretch of elevated brush. Too clean, too still. Exactly the sort of place someone would choose to set up a rifle. The second shot never came. The sniper didn't get the chance. Her teammate fired first. It wasn't a rushed trigger pull. It was a clean, controlled response aimed at the tiny patch of terrain that didn't match the rest. His shot cut through the air with a confidence earned from years of practice. She recognized the sound of his rifle. Each of them had their own rhythm, their own way of controlling recoil and pull. You could close your eyes and know who fired just by the tone. The sniper's position jolted with the impact. Even from where she was crouched, she saw the subtle shift in the brush. Her teammate had landed the shot at just the right angle, forcing the shooter to break position. That was all they needed. A hidden enemy relies on staying hidden. Once exposed, even slightly, the balance changes. The team moved the moment the shot landed. She lifted her head just enough to confirm the lane was open. Another teammate advanced in short, controlled bursts, keeping low while covering the other's movement. She followed close behind, her weapon ready but steady. They weren't charging blind. They were moving with intent, closing the distance before the sniper could recover. As they pushed forward, she felt the shift in momentum. A second ago, they had been the targets. Now they were the ones dictating the pace. The sniper had lost the advantage of surprise. He had lost the angle, and he had lost the precious seconds he needed to line up another shot. Her teammate fired again, not to finish the fight, but to lock down the sniper's last position. A controlled burst. Not reckless, not rushed, just enough to keep the shooter pinned. She advanced with the others until the terrain opened enough to confirm what they needed to know. The sniper was no longer a threat. The entire exchange lasted only seconds. Quick enough that someone unfamiliar with this world might have missed the complexity of it. But for them, it was the product of every hour spent drilling reactions until speed became instinct. The sniper had aimed first. The sniper had fired first. But SEALs answered faster because their decisions were already made before the danger arrived. What stayed with her afterward wasn't the sound of the rifle or the speed of the countershot. It was the moment right after the danger passed, when she felt the weight of what had almost happened settle into her chest. Close calls don't always come with drama. Sometimes they come with a quiet that makes you think more clearly than you want to. She found herself replaying the seconds before the shot, not to scare herself, but to understand them. Trust and discipline weren't abstract ideas to her. They were the reasons she was still standing. She had learned them in training, but she had felt their meaning out there on the ridge. Trust came first, not the easy kind where you assume things will work out. Real trust, the kind built through long, exhausting days where people see you at your worst and still expect your best. She trusted her team because she had watched them earn it piece by piece. She trusted them because they noticed details no one else would. The way someone scanned a corner, The way someone fixed their stance the same way every time. She trusted them because she knew they weren't guessing when they made a move. They were drawing from the same deep well of preparation. Out there, when the sniper fired, she didn't have to wonder whether her team would react. She knew they would take the right angles, watch her blind spots, and make the shot if the moment demanded it. Discipline mattered just as much. Discipline kept her from lifting her head too quickly. It kept her from firing back in panic. It kept her breathing steady when instinct might have pushed her into rushing. She had been trained to control the impulse to do something for the sake of feeling safer. Instead, she held still long enough to gather real information. Discipline taught her that sometimes doing nothing for a second is the hardest and smartest move you can make. That 1 second bought her team the time they needed to lock onto the sniper's position. After the mission, she considered how much of trust and discipline formed the backbone of every choice they made out there. She remembered a moment during training when an instructor told them that discipline wasn't about strict rules. It was about doing what's right when no one is watching, and doing it even when fear tries to steer you in another direction. Back then, it sounded like a line meant to motivate them. Standing on that ridge, it felt like truth. Discipline had kept her alive long enough for her teammate to take the shot. She also learned something about how quickly situations can tilt from controlled to fragile. One decision from the sniper had turned a quiet approach into a life-or-death moment. It reminded her that preparation isn't just about handling action. It's about accepting that danger doesn't always announce itself in a way you can easily interpret. Even the most seasoned operators can be caught off guard. What matters is what you've built into yourself before the moment arrives. Her team talked about the incident later in their own way. Mostly short comments, practical observations, nothing dramatic. Someone mentioned the angle of the brush. Another brought up how the wind had been carrying sound differently on that ridge. Someone else pointed out how quickly the sniper had settled into the shot. They weren't revisiting the danger. They were studying the details so they could fold them into their future decisions. She appreciated that. It made the whole thing feel less like luck and more like another lesson they could use. What struck her most was how much the moment made her aware of the responsibility they held for one another. She had always known it, but knowing something and feeling it are different. When she sensed danger and the others reacted, it wasn't just skill. It was commitment. They had moved without hesitation because they trusted she would have done the same for them. That kind of bond changes how you operate. It changes how you prepare before a mission. It changes how you carry yourself even on days when nothing goes wrong. The lesson stayed with her long after the ridge. Trust isn't built during the crisis. It's built in the slow, unremarkable hours of training when no one is watching. Discipline isn't proven by dramatic actions. It shows up in the way you breathe, the way you hold your weapon, the way you choose patience over panic. And when those two things come together in a moment where someone is aiming at your life, they create the thin line between what almost happened and what actually did afterward. When the mission was over and the adrenaline settled, she found herself thinking about how close calls linger in ways that long, steady missions don't. They mark you, not with fear, but with a sharper sense of what matters. She kept going back to the instant when everything could have swung the other way. One pull of a trigger, one misread sign, one hesitation. Those moments don't fade. They reshape how you approach the next day, the next decision, the next person you're responsible for. She didn't see it as trauma. She saw it as a recalibration. The ridge had taught her something about leadership that she hadn't learned in any briefing room. When danger arrives without warning, your team won't look at your rank. They'll look at your steadiness. They'll look at how you hold yourself in that instant when the world tightens. She remembered how she kept her breath even, how she didn't rush the wrong move, how she trusted the others instead of trying to take control just to feel in command. That restraint mattered. It was a reminder that leadership isn't only about giving orders. It's also about showing calm in the space between choices. She realized that the people who survive dangerous work aren't just fast or strong. They're adaptable. They take moments that should rattle them and turn them into something useful. On the ridge, she felt how close danger had come. Later, she didn't try to bury that feeling. She studied it. She looked at what her instincts caught early, what her team saw, what they all missed, and what they'd done right. Not to dwell, but to refine. That process became a habit. She started paying closer attention to small mistakes in training, to her own tendencies, to the tension in the team when a mission dragged too long. The close call made her sharper without making her paranoid. It also changed how she listened. Before, she had focused mostly on tactics and angles. After that day, she paid more attention to her teammates themselves, how they carried stress, how they recovered after a mission, how they masked fatigue behind jokes. The ridge reminded her that skill alone isn't enough to keep people alive. You have to understand the humans behind the gear. You have to know when someone is off their rhythm. On missions after that, she was quicker to check in quietly, to adjust assignments, to give someone a moment before pushing forward. It wasn't softness. It was awareness. The incident made her understand the value of patience in a different way too. A sniper's advantage is often time. Rushing toward uncertainty only gives them what they want. She carried that lesson into missions that had nothing to do with long-range fire. When things felt rushed or chaotic, she learned to slow her mind even if her body was moving fast. She kept reminding herself that clarity comes from attention, not speed. That perspective helped her make cleaner calls and avoid the kind of mistakes that come from pressure rather than necessity. The closest calls also made her more grateful for the people beside her. That wasn't something she said out loud. It wasn't the culture, but she felt it. The trust between them had always been strong, but after the ridge, it felt deeper. They had pulled her out of a moment she might not have walked away from. Not because it was their job, but because they had chosen to be a team in the truest sense. She carried that with her in the small interactions, a nod before a long patrol, a shared glance before splitting directions, a quiet acknowledgement when someone caught something she missed. Those moments weren't dramatic, but they meant something. She also learned that surviving a close call doesn't make you feel invincible. It does the opposite. It reminds you that skill and training matter, but so does timing, so does awareness, so does the collective effort of the people around you. It humbles you in a way that pushes you to prepare better, train harder, and take nothing for granted. Not out of fear, but out of respect for how quickly things can change. Most of all, the ridge changed her understanding of purpose. Before that mission, she thought of her work in terms of tasks and objectives. Afterward, she saw it in terms of responsibility. Responsibility to stay sharp. Responsibility to stay aware. Responsibility to make decisions that keep the team safe. Responsibility to pass on the lessons she learned the hard way. The close call didn't define her, but it refined her. And every mission after that carried the imprint of that day, shaping how she moved, how she led, and how she understood the line between what might have happened and what actually did.